Hello, my name is Jeff Fuller. I'm the Prince William County GOP Election Integrity Chair, and I've been serving as a um, unofficial coordinator, for lack of a better term, for the Virginia Election Integrity and Transparency Alliance, which is basically conservative or Republican organizations in Northern Virginia and somewhat beyond who are involved in election integrity and concerned about it. So I'm going to give you a wrap up of a project we started at the request of one of our uh, members so that we can kind of document what happened and what we found. I think it's important when we have these conversations about election integrity and transparency that we don't forget the transparency part of the equation. This survey done in 2021, I don't think the situation's gotten any better since then, um, basically says in effect that 50% of the population, both Democrat and Republican, do not have uh, do not trust the election system, and this is it's unsustainable and it's got to be fixed. So everything that we do should be trying to increase the confidence of the electorate in the system, but not by BSing them, but by actually making the system more open, understandable, simple, and elegant. Well, CISA declared in 2020, after the 2020 election, and shortly after, that it was the most secure election in American history. By that time, many of us knew that was not the case. So, what did we observe? Well, we saw a concerted psychological operation campaign with being conducted throughout the United States in mainstream media, social media, and uh, in print media, all sorts of media, spreading the word that there was no problem with the election, and that in fact information available to the public was wildly distorted in terms of disinformation and blocking information that was truthful but was unuseful to the powers to be. We saw a significant attack by the progressive cabal on the election financing system, most notably using Vote Blue contributors' accounts to contribute significant amount of money to uh, the non-government organizations that are involved in this and actual candidates. We saw, of course, and when we did this analysis, it hadn't even begun in major form, but government agency weaponization to punish enemies and reward allies. And, and then basically election system attack on the election system through various control apparatus, ERIC for providing information to the progressive cabal, Albert censors, and a significant attack on the um, absentee ballot system. You see at the bottom here the 2000 mule documentation of voters of somebody stuffing absentee ballots into ballot boxes that were unsecured. So we just summarize our assessment of the overall picture that there's four legs to the stool. There's um, a fair election system, which is what we kind of focus on when we think about elections. Um, then there's fair government action. There's campaign finance law and informed electorate. Those are the four legs of the stool that are necessary to have for our franchise to be protected. The information election component or informed electorate component is basically attacked by systematic psychological operations mounted by the government of the United States and the Democratic Party and the progressive cabal associated with them. The campaign finance law has been systematically attacked, and there's some evidence of that, but more and more is coming out on that process. And of course, we expect fair government action, but we don't get it. We've got a government that is basically putting its foot on the scale and attempting to influence the outcome of elections in big time ways. And finally, with regard to the fair election system, I've already mentioned that is being attacked in terms of the hardware, the software, the processes, absentee balloting, and so forth. So our focus for the purposes of this study was the election system, the thing we usually think of when we think of elections. But we can't forget the significant part that the other plays. For example, for psychological operations aspect, just the FBI and the Justice Department holding back information on the Hunter and basically shedding shade on the Hunter Biden laptop was estimated to have significantly affected voters' choices, up to 17% impact on voters either staying home or not voting for Biden. Our approach was to leverage the expertise of the different members of this group and then follow up with advocacy and communication. Let me say at this point that our ability to do this was basically dashed when the elections in 2023 resulted in the loss of the House and the Senate to the Democrats. There was no chance for any election law changes. In fact, the Democrats mounted 15 separate bills in order to open up or increase vulnerability of the election system. So, in short, without the ability to change the laws, our ability to maneuver was on the edges. And we've since done an effort to identify a number of things that were doable within the law as written, and we've been pursuing those. This particular thing that we did had a small group. We identified the first step was to assess, which was to identify the major vulnerabilities, identify potential solutions, to mitigate those, and we came up with 4 different courses of action, which I'll touch on. And finally, were we able to get past that step, we would coordinate and socialize and communicate and sell. So we basically stopped after partway through the first step, as illustrated here. So we defined, one of the useful things that I think you might find interesting is we defined the election system to include the operations aspect plus the components. So the election operations are affected by Department of Elections at the top, the various electoral boards, jurisdictions, of which I can't remember how many there are, but there's over 100. The precincts within each of the jurisdictions, which is our early voting, central precinct for absentee ballot manipulations and calculations and counting and so forth, and then election day precincts. This landscape is established in law at the U.S. government level for federal elections, and then, of course, state law for our state elections. We identified these 7 election components, which you can do this in different ways, but this seemed to make sense, and for the purposes of describing the system and analyzing it. The first question we went through was, is information available in order to assess the system? And this, without beating a dead horse, this basically identifies our judgment of the whether the system is available, whether the information is available, and should we assess it. And you can see there are some components of the system that we functions and levels of the system that we didn't think we could assess, and some we could. And then we asked the question: is the level or function of that component and level of the system critical? And we identified those we thought were, and some we didn't know. Then we went through, and this is just an illustration of the vulnerability and risk management of each of those components. And we identified, for example, the Albert sensor system was number one in terms of an issue that needs to be addressed, as it represents a federal intrusion into our state in spades. The Albert system exists at the Information Technology Center of the state, Commonwealth, and in Prince William County and a number of other counties, we believe widely throughout the Commonwealth. And with regard to hardware and software, can it be tested? Can it be evaluated? Basically, we decided you can't do it. Because the proprietary nature of the system and the software makes it impossible for any competent tester or evaluator to get inside of it. And then, of course, we highlighted the problems with ERIC, which fortunately the Commissioner of Elections pulled the plug on. So I'll just let you read this. Basically, the bottom line is there's no way to reconcile the voters' intent on their ballots if you can't count the votes on the ballots and not rely on a automated either a capture of the document. It's been demonstrated that can be manipulated by intrusion into the software, or the actual count of what those things look like in terms of the votes. So this framework here illustrates the 4 courses of action we considered and the major considerations such as confidence in the solution, the time required, the cost, and then we ranked them from highest to lowest. The first one, no change, was not acceptable. Too important. Our franchise is at risk. Our country's at risk. The acquiring an assured system, at first, at least to me and several of us, seemed like a possible alternative. I mean, after all, Department of Defense acquires the F-22 fighter jet with very complex systems, hardware and software, and human interfaces, and so forth, and sustainability and maintenance. So it seems possible. However, we concluded that course of action is not feasible because there are so many vulnerabilities in the hardware and software. And even if you started from scratch with a whole new system and put it through all the rigor that you would expect of a F-22 flight control system by Department of Defense, we concluded that because of the way it is distributed throughout the country and supported and interacted with, there's no way that such a system could be designed to be secure against a determined and sophisticated intruder. So we assessed that to be not acceptable. So if you just a few more words on the French paper system, that seems to be the only way to go. We have high confidence that it can be done because it has been done for 35 million people in France, and they get it done in one day. However, there's no use in even talking about it until you can change the legislature, except to say that it might be worthwhile socializing the idea of it so that when the legislature comes in, if we are successful in ousting the Democrats, there would be at least some conceptual framework to work with. This graphic illustrates the labyrinth of 501c3 organizations that are funded by the federal government and literally have created an incredible network intended to gain and maintain control of our elections and influence our electorate and so forth. This is just a graphic to illustrate that. I'm not going to speak to these in detail, but simply to say, give you a sense of what issues we have worked and are working. The first issue is that we're concerned that we have a requirement in the law to have a capability of running paper elections, but no one's ever practiced it, and we don't have sufficient guidance to election officers for them to pull it off without a complete, let's just call it a jug screw. So we believe that needs to be improved. We've talked to the electoral board about it, and they've indicated some willingness to consider this. The second one is to encourage voters to deliver absentee ballots directly to early voting precincts in order to avoid the vulnerability that's basically present in most election offices who are manned by fairly intense, progressive, liberal postal workers. So there's been a number of issues with post offices, and we have no specific accusations for any particular post office, but we think it's appropriate for citizens to just alleviate that concern and deliver their absentee ballot, if they can, directly to the early voting precinct at their leisure. The next two I want to address, it's education, and it's basically being pulled off with great efficiency by the Virginia Free Election Group, of which a number of our folks participate regularly. The fifth one is to ask the Commissioner of Elections to allow for batch comparison risk limiting audits in federal elections. Now, interestingly, in this election year, the Democrat legislature slipped in language in the budget bill that prevented any money to be spent on a audit of the presidential election, which in normal human activity would be what you'd call a clue with regard to their intent. And in this case, they also put in some language that requires 4 out of 5 election state election board commissioners to agree on any audit of any election, which means that 2 Democrats just one of them can agree to eliminate the option of doing that, which they did this year by eliminating the opportunity of a batch comparison audit of the Senate race, which was a statewide race. So we hope to continue to pursue this, but it's an uphill climb given the nature of the Democrats' resistance to these things. Number 7 is allow election officers to participate and observe absentee ballot curing. We have been having an ongoing, let's just say, discussion with the electoral board and the general registrar about this. The general registrar is hard over on not allowing election officers or poll watchers to observe this process. Yet it's a very important process. Votes are either discarded or considered further, and we have no eyes on that from the parties. Number 8 is we think that chief election officers ought to, since they swear an oath to uphold the law and make sure that elections are safe and fair, that they ought to be able to do a check of their own results in the event that they have some disconnect, say, between the number of ballots that they counted for versus the number that were on the machine versus the number that were number of folks that were captured on the poll books. So it's possible to make mistakes on these things, but if the chief wants to do it, we believe he should be able to do a count of his votes. And that now, let me just add that with regard to the non-citizen voting issues, I grade those out, but it turns out that the after the governor's executive order, at about actually coincident with that, our outfit in Prince William called Epic found thousands of voters that had been removed from the rolls because they were listed as non-citizens. This ended up in a big legal battle that actually went to the Supreme Court, and our governor's position was upheld. But it's important to note that in Prince William, we had 113 non-citizens voters removed. Of these, 43 have voting records in the elect database, and not a single one has been accounted for by the general registrar. In other words, of these 43, this one did this one was a citizen and has been re-registered, this one I've referred for investigation to the Attorney General's office or the Commonwealth Attorney, but we get nothing. So that's basically a quick summary. We continue to work these issues as well as we can within the limits of our position as a party and citizens. So that concludes my briefing. I'm including here my contact information, which you're welcome to contact me and discuss this. I hope the briefing provides some adequate response to the question, what was up with that project? Let me just say that this transitioned when we lost the legislature into a much more modest attempt to identify specific projects that could be done in this year, and we're pursuing those. We had some success with the influence of the governor. We think we had an influence on the governor with regard to vetoing 15 bills offered by the Democrats to increase the vulnerability of our systems and the opportunities to cheat. But though we are working on several, some of these seem to be of some utility, but they're definitely not as grand a scope as going to a paper election. So thank you.